Everybody has asked in the past about what happened to Vallejo, and you guys are in for the true inside look at what happened, because Stephanie was there. She and I are part of another group that's working on a project as her videographer on state with Jeff Adachi, trying to solve to work on scale problems. So I invited her, took the opportunity of our meeting to have her come and talk to you directly. So Stephanie has been since 2005, just got in the perfect time for the disaster that's happening. She is a California woman born in San Jose and attended schools down in Campbell, and she studied political science at UCLA. So did I. Well, look where I ended up. Oh well, I saw the light and got an MBA later on, but at the time, political science seemed the time in the early 70s. Anyway, she has worked for the U.S. Forest Service for 22 years, and she has been involved in all sorts of aspects of public service, and then she elected, somewhat misguidedly, to run for the City Council of Vallejo, where she's kind of been a lone wolf in many aspects. So please help me welcome Stephanie Gomes.
A lone wolf, yes. I'm going to try and keep track of my time.
Well, there's a clock over there.
Yes. Okay. So it was interesting trying to put my thoughts together on this, because we don't have the perspective of hindsight yet. We're still in the middle of bankruptcy, nearing the end of it, but we haven't had the time to be able to really look at what happened in a meaningful way. But it was a good exercise for me. So I thank you for inviting me here. And the main question that I was asked was, is bankruptcy a way out for cities or counties struggling with this financial crisis that we see ourselves in? The short answer to that, no, it's not. But there's a lot longer answer. Similar to people who struggle with their weight, there's no magic pill when it comes to trying to find a solution to solve our problems. It really is a math problem, very simple. It's revenues in, expenditures out. And many cities and states, even the country, we've all been living beyond our means. We've all been kind of gorging on the money that's been coming into our coffers and committing them for many years to come without having calculated out what those costs would be and if we could pay them when the good times ended. And unfortunately, I think the good times have ended, at least for now. And so we're all asking that million-dollar question: how do we hit that reset button and make our budget sustainable? It gets back to that revenues and expenditures out. And I think it's going to be more tricky right now during the Great Recession in terms of revenues. We all want to do economic development. We all want to bring in new businesses. Not the best time to do that. Eventually, when things pick up, yes. Cities and municipalities are looking to raise taxes. And I take it that in this room that's probably not very popular. Vallejo's looking at that right now, and I didn't support it. I didn't support putting it on a tax increase on the ballot because we haven't fixed our problems. I don't see how we can go back to the taxpayers and ask for more money when we haven't solved our problems. But the toughest answer, and what got Vallejo into so much trouble, was reining in our expenditures, and that is so complicated. Given that local government is labor intensive, it's all about, basically having employees to provide the services that we need. So when we need to address budget deficits, we have to look at employee costs, and anything else is just kicking that can down the road. That's the difficult part. Employee costs, employee unions, their control over local elections, it's very difficult. I think Vallejo should serve as a cautionary tale. And it's not so much about avoiding bankruptcy, but about the repercussions of financial mismanagement, of poor planning, of giving control of your purse strings to someone other than your elected officials, those elected to represent the people, giving control of the purse strings over to your public employees. And many of us share commonalities. Vallejo had a perfect storm. There's some things that you guys won't have to deal with, thankfully. Someone said, why does Vallejo do everything so big? We do. We did it all at once, too. You know, we lost Mare Island Naval Base in the late 90s. That was a huge, huge impact. And I think we're still not recognizing the impact of that. It left a vacuum, a huge vacuum in Vallejo. The city had depended on federal money for hundreds of years. And all of a sudden, that was gone. And the leaders, I don't think, really knew how to stand on their own. They didn't know how to do economic development, to do it well. They knew how to ask for help from the government. And I think the employee unions kind of came in and filled that gap and at the end. So I'm going to make a disclaimer here, because I think it's important. I get criticized for being an employee union hater, and that's not true. I think that for many years our leaders in Vallejo failed. They failed in that they didn't invest in economic development. They failed in that they agreed to the union's requests. They didn't cost them out. They gave in. They wanted to get reelected. And it was easy. It's much easier to agree than to go against them. I can attest to that. Unfortunately, those people, those leaders who made those decisions, who gave in, they're not there. They're not there anymore. I am. When I came in 2005, we already were heading downhill, and everything had piled up, and it was time to say no. And my main commitment when I first got elected was that I would not leave to future councils what was left to me. I wouldn't do that to them. And I pretty much stuck to that. But the employee unions did have a huge part in this. They had a huge part. They helped engineer this unsustainable system. They took advantage of elected officials who needed their money to get elected and who wanted to get along. They say, you know, why do you blame us for taking what they gave? I don't necessarily blame them for that. What I do blame them for, however, is not helping us solve the problem. When Vallejo was heading into bankruptcy, we begged, we pleaded, we negotiated, we did everything we could to get concessions that were meaningful, that would help us avoid bankruptcy, and they didn't give it. They also, once we filed for bankruptcy, they fought us for months and months and millions of dollars, I would think, just on the fact of whether we were insolvent. Just on the fact of whether we were hiding money. Why didn't we use the water fund, the transportation fund? Why don't we have all that money? You're not using it. Pay our salaries. Give us our money. And luckily the judge said that was illegal, and we didn't. But I think it's the law of unintended consequences. Cities like San Jose and Stockton and Sacramento, they're using our bankruptcy experience as a bargaining chip with their employees, because we did it and it could happen to them. And I'm seeing concessions made now, while not big, unheard of 3 years ago. Even a small step, unheard of 3 years ago. I think those unions know that cities can file for bankruptcy. They can void contracts in bankruptcy. It's not fun and it's not preferred, but it can happen. So they have to work with their management. In Vallejo, those lovely days of the bubble when everyone was kind of drunk on money, the public safety unions, like I said, they grew really powerful, and they put their dues into the local elections, and they bought favor with the councils. And if you think that that doesn't happen, it does. When I went for my endorsement interview, you have to go. You go to everyone and tell them what you're about. And I went. All the unions joined together. Oh, it was so naive. All the unions joined together, and they asked me, if we endorse you, will you stay bought? And my naive self at that time just looked at them, and I just said, you can't buy me in the first place, so I can't stay bought. That pretty much set the stage. We hired city managers. We had a couple. We had Otto Giuliani, who was willing to take on the unions and try to fix the problem. He was eventually sued for defamation of character by the president of the local fire union. along with 2 former council members. We brought in Joe Tanner, who's here, who you know, I believe is the best city manager that we've ever had. Truly, he came in and took it on in a big way, just like me, and put that big target on his forehead, and he suffered for it. You know, he definitely suffered for it. So we tried to fix the problems. So back to when I was elected, $3 million operating deficit, bam, right off the bat in 2005. They had tried, previous councils, they tried to balance the budget. They balanced it though by deferring raises, and year after year deferring raises, and extending contracts. So we had contracts that extended to 2012. We had these raises, I think there was like 8%, something like that, that were come due in 2005. And we had that $3 million deficit. And we won't even talk about the unfunded liabilities. That's a whole nother story, a whole nother discussion. We also had, so we had minimum staffing in the fire department. We had a debated minimum manning clause in the police department contract. And we also had binding arbitration in our city charter. So all of those combined pretty much tied the city council's hands completely. Basically, if we needed to make cutbacks in expenditures, and police, fire, public employees, they were about 80%, 78% of our budget. So when you got to make cuts, that's where you have to go. But we couldn't do that. We had to get the unions to approve, and if not, then an arbitrator. And arbitration doesn't typically go in the favor of cities. So, and also the arbitrator didn't have to take into consideration whether we can afford his decision. So we negotiated for a year. The then city manager tried his hardest. I knew it wasn't going to work. I had worked with these guys before. But he tried, to give him credit, and he declared him a failure about a year later. And I'm very proud to say that for the first time, probably ever, the city council, except for 2 newly elected council members who were endorsed by the unions, we voted to refuse the offers of the police and fire unions to defer and extend. And we cut the fire truck staffing to achieve the cost savings we needed. We balanced the budget. But the unions arbitrated that decision. So we cut back on truck staffing. We eliminated funding for all our community organizations, our vehicle replacements, road repair, maintenance, everything cut. And we started to exhaust what very little reserves we had left. That's just trying to stay with our heads above the water. So you enter 2007, 2008, the perfect storm happened. It all combined. We lost the fire truck arbitration. So we got hit with, I can't remember what that loss represented. Joe, do you remember? $4 million, yes.
Per year, and double every year.
$4 million a year that, right off the bat, that added to our deficit. Our development revenues started dropping off. Our housing started to decline. Employees at or near retirement, they saw the lay of the land and they left. They jumped ship to a $4 million leave payout. So we tried to negotiate last minute concessions to stave off a bankruptcy filing. We desperately tried. The council majority decided to try, and the union said, hey, we'll come to the table and negotiate with you if you'll resolve every grievance we have with the city and give us some increases in our pay. That was obviously a net loss. That lasted like 3 months, and they came to the table, but they didn't really come to the table. So our general fund was depleted. Our reserves were gone. Labor concessions were expiring. We were broke. Our closed session meetings, you talk about the story behind it. Ooh, they were bloody. They were painful. The council members who didn't really recognize the writing on the wall, it was pretty obvious. They desperately tried to make things pencil out. They were taking the budget and moving things here and putting that there, and trying to use tricks in a sense to make it work so we didn't have to file. But the fact was that it all came down to that math problem. Revenues in, expenditures out, and we just couldn't take the eraser and move things around anymore. They'd done that for too long, and it was just too late. So on May 6, 2008, we authorized the filing for bankruptcy. That was an agonizing, painful moment. Leading up to that, high drama. Of course, the unions came, and protested. We had community members fighting with the union members. We had a pig's head brought into the council chambers. We had a live goose brought into the chambers to show that they were killing the goose that lays the golden egg. A lot of stuff went on, and it was very dramatic, but quite painful. I think the vote was unanimous. I know the vote was unanimous, but I think that it shocked the unions because their folks had never voted against them before. And, but I think, well, I know, was told to us, a little part of the law that says if a council member knows that they're using either restricted funds to pay for general fund services, or that they know that there's no money to pay for the work when the employees come to work the next day, that they could be personally liable. They lose their immunity. So they can lose their houses, they can lose their businesses. I think that was pretty powerful, and that's why you saw a unanimous vote for bankruptcy. And that's what kind of makes things a little interesting, because you had members of the council who voted for bankruptcy yet didn't really want it because, you know, their benefactors didn't want it either. And so the decisions after that is what brought about, I believe, our failure in bankruptcy. It became a very nasty legal battle. As I said, they fought our declaration of insolvency. They said we were hiding money. They wanted us to use those other funds. The judge eventually saw that and indeed said we were insolvent. Very hollow victory, I have to say, and a lot of money spent proving that, which we already knew. So we created a pendency plan, and that in bankruptcy is basically what allows you to take a breath, to have the protection of bankruptcy and make cuts that you need to make that you couldn't normally under other circumstances, that you couldn't. We froze wages and benefits, we implemented furloughs, we cut our interest payments to the banks, and we actually suspended some for like I think 3 months to conserve cash. But it did allow us to continue to operate, and we kept the lights on at City Hall. We provided police protection, fire protection, we provided basic services, and at the time started to work through our financial problems. And we negotiated with our creditors, and that included the employee unions. And I think right here, and it's the question I got before I talked today several times, right here lies the very exact moment of Vallejo's failure in bankruptcy. Excluding myself and another council member, the council majority voted in February of '09 to approve a police contract, a new police contract, post-bankruptcy contract. And that contract didn't cut pensions, didn't cut pay, didn't require contribution to health care, and it also agreed to raises for the next 2 years. So in bankruptcy, also, the financial manager told us that night that we were also looking at a $12 million deficit. So in bankruptcy, with a $12 million deficit, a police contract was signed and agreed to that basically set the stage for all the other negotiations. Of course, the employees said me too after that, the other employees. They wanted the same thing. I don't blame them. Joe perhaps can talk about his reasonings for that one if he wants. He may not want to, but it was the only thing I disagreed with Joe on that, on that. And I know why he did it. I know intellectually why, but in my heart, I don't. And the fact is that, like I said, this was our opportunity to lead the way and show people that we could use bankruptcy to get healthy again, not to break unions, not to just to get new contracts, but to get healthy again. And this proved that we were doing the same thing that got us there. It was crazy. Why go through the pain of bankruptcy? Why do it if you're just going to limp out with the same contracts that you went in with? If you're going to go into bankruptcy, if you're going to pay all that money, do it right. Get the problem fixed. And we didn't, and that's so frustrating. That really was the most painful moment in my council career. It took me a long time to get over that one. But I had to set it aside, and I did. But I knew we couldn't afford it. I knew it was wrong. I knew it with every fiber of my being. This was the time to fix that structural deficit. This was the moment, and we lost it. But we set it down, had to. Had to kind of grow up a little bit. Of course, you want to say, you know, I told you so all the time, but I can't do that anymore. You move on. So we've created a 5-year plan at this point, and right now it's sustainable. We, if all goes well, we're going to be out of bankruptcy at the end of July, August, sometime around there. But I do have my worries about it. You know, we have been as conservative as we can with our projections. We're doing everything we can to make this 5-year plan work, but I worry that it's not going to work. And another little side note of the police contract that was signed in bankruptcy, the council also agreed to pay the police union's legal fees if we ever had to bring that contract back into bankruptcy. Yeah. So it was interesting. Yeah. So there is a bright spot in bankruptcy. There were several, actually, to be truthfully. One was the change in public opinion. As we went through this, the salaries and the benefits of our public employees, like everywhere else, is starting to come to the forefront. And you know, the fact that our police and fire and other employees were making, you know, 150, 175 to 250 a year, it really angered people in a community where the median household income was, I think, $75,000 or $70,000 at the time. It angered people. So it was tried a couple times before and failed, but for the first time we were able to remove binding arbitration from the charter. The community got together, they demanded it, the council put it on, and we worked really, really hard. I don't remember how much the union spent fighting us on it, quite a lot of money. $102,000? $100,000 fighting us on binding arbitration. We, the community, raised probably $5,000, maybe $7,000. We were hand painting signs in my backyard and putting them up, and we won. We won. A very big deal for us, because in 2012, those contracts are coming up again. And for the first time since probably the 60s, City Council gets to make the final decision on what we can afford to pay. So there are a lot of stories that I can't go into about what happened. I'm sure you'd like to hear. There was a lot of ugliness. There was a lot of ugliness that we all experienced. But it's doing the right thing is what's important, and that's what we tried to do. Good, bad, and the ugly of bankruptcy. That's what you asked. The good. The first 2 years of bankruptcy with this pendency plan, we were able to save $35 million just implementing the pendency plan. The unions like to point out how expensive bankruptcy is, and it is. We've paid $11 million in legal fees. A lot of that because they kept fighting us. But you know, if you do the math on that, it was a net gain. It was a benefit for us to be able to go into bankruptcy, make those cuts, make these changes, and start to fix the problem. I think all the abuse, the undue influence, the bad accounting practices, they all came to light. Very painful to have your dirty laundry aired, especially, you know, national news all over the place, but it was important because it had been hidden for a long time and the public didn't know what was going on, and all of that came to light. I think political leaders were forced to show their cards. You know, they had to vote. There's a yes or a no, and it pretty much showed where you were coming from, whether they wanted to or not. The opportunity to restructure and reorganize, and we're doing that, and the fact that we did prove that we can, through bankruptcy, void unsustainable labor contracts with the judge's permission. So that was a big positive. The bad, that $11 million in legal fees, we couldn't use that. We could use that for our community organizations, to fix our streets, to put more police officers on the street. Our police force has been decimated in numbers. While our costs for the employees continue to go up, the number of employees continues to go down, which just shows that you're not cutting the cost of the employees. You're just cutting the number of employees to keep at that same level of pay. And the ugly is that bankruptcy hurts. It hurts our reputation. It hurts the relationships in the community. It hurts the employees. Employee morale is terrible. And the public employee union battles. They were ugly. There's something, I think a guy who works with police unions, I think it's Ron DeLorde, they have this article called Circle the Wagons, and it basically is a 3-point plan in how to bloody the noses of people who want to go against the unions. And they bloodied our noses. You know, they put up big signs, big huge signs in town on the billboards showing, you know, oh, nobody's safe in Vallejo, police and fire are all gone. Basically, it was a big welcome mat to criminals. Come on in Vallejo because there's no cops to stop you from doing what you want. It was really ugly. But we have adopted new rules to live by. And they're very basic. Most of you probably would go, duh. But if we can follow these, we're going to be fine. Live within your means. Look to your future. Stop deferring expenses. Fund retirement obligations. Dedicate your surplus. And set up a rainy day fund. Those are really important because we weren't doing that. So if we follow those rules, we're going to be on the road to recovery. I think many cities kind of snickered at us when we went into bankruptcy. I think it was Santa Rosa City Council had a presentation one day. It was gloating about the fact that, you know, how solvent they were. But many cities now are in or near the same place that we were 3 years ago. Whereas right now we at least are stable. At the bottom, we're stable, but we're stable. We're not in that free fall. So if I've learned anything from our Chapter 9 experience, it's that Chapter 9 should be an absolutely, positively last resort. It is not a way to get out of your unsustainable labor contracts. If that's all you want to do, really, the public employee unions have to get together with management and solve the problem outside of it. The cost to us, the employee union spent the same money on legal fees or close to it. It doesn't help anybody. It doesn't work for anybody. But I will say that if given the exact same circumstances, I'd vote for it again because we had to. We had no money to pay for employees to come to work at the end of June in 2008. We had no choice. So contrary to the media reports, our bankruptcy didn't cause the decrease in police and fire officers or our roads to fall apart or our libraries to be cut. Our financial mismanagement over quite a few years, that's the cause, not bankruptcy itself. Bankruptcy is just a symptom. It was mismanagement that caused for these decreases. All these services were steadily decreasing at a very quick rate prior to bankruptcy, in the years prior to bankruptcy. So it's not the bankruptcy that you know you can point to. It's more fun, perhaps, more sensational, but it's not true. So I think I'll stop with the difficult and probably unpopular conclusion, but I think it's a really critical issue all over the country. I think a lot of you will probably agree, though. This isn't really a Democratic issue or a Republican issue. This is really an issue of realities, an issue of fairness to the taxpayers, the people who pay for the services that they're getting. Vallejo's experience kind of ripped the cover off that dirty little secret of how these unions are buying power and controlling the people who vote on their wages and benefits. Private sector unions can't control who their bosses are, but public employee unions take their collective power and their collective money, and they control the hiring and the firing of their bosses in a sense. And this is a systemic problem that it has to be fixed, or ultimately everything we're all trying to do, it's not going to work. It won't work. Waiting for elected officials to make these changes, it's going to be a long, long time. I think we've proven that. I think what this is going to take is for us, for the people, for the taxpayers, for the citizens to stand up and to demand that there's a change, and to demand that the pension reform is made, to demand that changes in how the unions and the employees and the management, how they can work in cities and counties and state. if you think the elected officials are going to fix it, you know, what was their first solution when we declared bankruptcy? It was to put a bill together in the assembly that would require cities to go through a committee, a state committee, you know, appointed by elected officials who were supported by the unions. We'd have to go to this committee to ask if we can file for bankruptcy. Oh, and employee contracts wouldn't be included in bankruptcy. That's their solution. When we were getting ready to file for bankruptcy, what did our elected officials do? Then Senator Wiggins, Assemblymember Noreen Evans, what did they do for us? They sent a letter. They sent their representative and read a letter at our city council meeting chastising us for filing for bankruptcy and being not nice to our unions. So I'm really convinced that as taxpayers that we have to demand these changes ourselves. We have to make it happen. We have to join together city by city, county by county, and we have to make our voices loud, we have to make them strong, and we have to demand solutions to these problems because they're not going to do them on their own. There aren't any saviors, it's only us. So that's all I have to say. I know you might want to have some questions,
Corey,
perhaps.
first of all, thank you. Painful experience for you and all of your fellow council members. I'm sure we do have questions, but from this group always.
Let's assume for a minute we're all bondholders out here, being bondholders. How did the judge, and I'm assuming you also have bonds out there, how did the judge look at the bondholders versus the pension obligations in the union? Where are they in this pecking order?
Everyone was a creditor. You know, there was a pool of creditors created. And what we tried to do, and Joe may be able to answer that because he's the good finance guy, but I think what we tried to do, Joe, if you want to, maybe you can add to that, to be as fair as we could to the bondholders. We needed to be. So we tried to keep up our payments as best we could, but they were given a haircut equally as the cuts we were making to our employees.
I was just going to add, you just said the right word. Judge McManus, the federal judge in Sacramento, treated all creditors equally. It didn't matter if you're a bondholder or a union member, or if you were PG&E. Every creditor was treated equally.
But we knew we needed access to the bond market again eventually, and we had to be as careful and fair as we could, and we worked really closely with the banks.
Well, what was fair? What was the haircut?
Well, we like I said, we cut our interest rate, I think, down to 2% at a certain point. We stopped paying the interest at all, and now we're still in the final negotiations of what the payouts will be, as our lawyers call it, tiny bankruptcy dollars.
Are they going to lose principal?
We owed $50 million to Union Bank, and it was really incredible dealing with those folks. They were the perfect group to deal with. They could not have been a better group. Professional, they understood the problem, they understood what their rights were, and we told them we're not going to pay you at all for a while, and they accepted that as best they could and understood the situation. And then we gave them a haircut and gave them less money, and then we tried to negotiate to make them whole over a long period of time, and unfortunately, they couldn't do it because those bonds are gone, and they weren't really the recipients of it. They were guaranteeing those bonds, but they couldn't cut the deal at the end of the day. And so at the end of the day, the judge just pronounced, boom, this is what you're going to get.
And the question I get asked a lot is, what about access to the bond market? When are you going to be able to get there again? Well, we have to prove that we fixed our problems, and we have to prove that we can sustain that. 5+ years, perhaps.
5 to 7 years.
Orange County immediately got back in, but they had the kind of bankruptcy that was based on a one-time crisis. It wasn't caused by sustained fiscal mismanagement.
You mentioned the media, and from your side of the aisle, do you think that you could have handled the media better? Because I remember always hearing the police on the media, the fire on TV, but I never heard the city's side.
I got criticized for talking to the media so much, but I'm a journalism major, and I do work with public affairs in the federal government, so I felt this responsibility to respond. But the city, as part of our cost-cutting measures leading up to bankruptcy, had canceled the public affairs position. And, you know, really, we were in free fall. And we had 5,000 things coming at us at one time, and putting together a crisis communication plan wasn't one of them. I kept saying we should as a journalism person, but so many things to focus on, and it was just unfortunately the least of the problems. And like you said, the union had good money to put into their PR, and they did it.
I can be more harsh. Well, I'm not running for any office, and I could care less. The Times-Herald is the absolute worst newspaper in the state of California. It is trash. It's a rag. Clear enough? And they were so much on the union side that I actually accused them of being bought and paid for by the union. It got so bad with the Times-Herald and their coverage that I actually tried to transfer all the legal notices over to the Contra Costa Times, even though they're owned by the same people. But, you know, the editor was different. And unfortunately, the Contra Costa Times refused to do our legal notices, so we were still stuck with the Times horde, as we used to call it.
Well, also,
they were a horrible newspaper, and they didn't help the city at all. As a matter of fact, they hurt the city badly.
The other good thing about bankruptcy and leading up to it is a local, and that's Mark's website, kind of a community-based journalism started to get out the real information, to get out the true facts of what was happening, you know, from our perspective. And nationally, you know, this issue now, it's more obvious because more cities, more entities are going through it, but at that time it was new. So what we were saying wasn't truly believed yet. It hadn't been proven yet. So when you had, you know, management basically saying, sorry, we can't afford it, and employees saying, oh, you know, we're hurting, we were the big bad wolves.
You heard how Contra Costa County glossed over the firefighter's contract, but it came down to 2012. Your police contract, Joe, is that going to set the tone 2 years from now you'll be broke again?
No, I don't think so personally. And let me explain why I recommended the city council at that time that they did adopt that police contract. We were in the throes of bankruptcy, the police and fire union and IEBW versus the city. We did not know if we were going to win or not. We did know that the police were paying half that bill. We knew fire was paying half that bill. We knew IEBW was paying a small part of that bill. But how much, we didn't know. So in order to break up police and fire from fighting us, my strategy was to get the police off of the table, or out of the picture, so to speak. So we're fighting the fire union and IEBW, which was a much smaller group to fight. And between the lawyers and I, we thought that that would be a good strategy to win this thing, because we didn't know we were going to win at all. Stephanie's absolutely right. It was a time which, you know, in hindsight, it would have been great if we had said no to the police at the time. But at that time, we didn't know if we were going to win or not. And in order to win, I felt it was necessary to sacrifice the police contract.
But the contracts are up next year, and we don't have binding arbitration. And I'll give the council credit, you know, the same folks that I was so disappointed in. There has been a shift. And the fire contract after the police did create a second tier for the pensions, and required some payments into health care. And in 2012, I think there's definitely more of an acknowledgement of the need to change. Unfortunately, the council members point to the fire contract as this is where we want everyone to be, and that's not where I'm at. I want to take everyone down even lower. It has to be, or we can't sustain it. That's a battle that's going to be fought later, and but we don't have binding arbitration, so that's a big deal and creates a whole different playing field.
And then you can get rid of that silly 3 at 50 formula that
Yes.
is, all you need is, you know, accounting 1A, and you can see that was
It doesn't work.
foolish from the get-go.
In 2012, when the election comes, or not election, but the arbitration comes, and you can't make an agreement with the policeman or the fireman, do they have a right to strike? And if they strike, I see it, or sick out, they have a right for sick out or something like that?
No.
So, so what happens?
We can impose.
What happens?
We can impose the contract. They can still take it and mediate it.
What happens in public employee bargaining, if some of you probably know, if you do not come to an agreement, the city council can impose a contract and it'll last for 1 year. And the union has to take it, whether they like it or not.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's a couple of questions, actually. It's about retiree pensions. Do the employees of Vallejo have lifetime medical, number one? And number two, how did the bankruptcy affect the benefits that the retirees got?
Yeah, that's a more difficult one.
Well, the city council eliminated retiree medical.
That was hard.
I should say they eliminated most of it. They gave a $300 stipend for each retiree.
Current retirees.
Current retiree for their lifetime medical. And before that, it would cost anywhere from $900 to $1,800 per employee, depending on if they were married and family, et cetera. Now it's $300.
And that, I still feel badly about that one. It's tough to change the benefits of people who have already retired, but we didn't have a choice. We really didn't.
Wow, that's horrible.
But
Because
you know
when
what?
you retire, you count on that money, and you work your whole life for that.
Yeah. Well, the system's imploding, so they at least get that, because if we don't fix it, nobody's going to get anything. That's the unfortunate facts of this.
To make it a little bit worse, fire employees, I think police employees were not in Social Security in Vallejo, and so they do not get Medicare when they turn 65 either. So they're kind of screwed.
And we tried to give the employees who retired pre 3% at 50 didn't make as much money and didn't retire on as much, and we tried to create a second group where we can keep their medical at the same level, and pre 3% at 50, who retired on 90% of their pretty large salaries, they can afford it, but we couldn't. It was
It's against the law.
Yeah, it was against the law. So what we suggested is perhaps the police and fire unions might want to give those pre 3 at 50 folks some of theirs and support them. Let's go to you.
Of your costs of going through the bankruptcy, roughly, do you have any idea how much of it was just fighting the unions against doing it versus just going through the whole process legally?
I haven't seen it broken out. I think
While I
originally
was city manager, it was about 80% fighting.
Yeah, the original estimates were like what, 3 million, 4 million?
2 or 3 million to do
Yeah.
the whole thing.
So we're at 11. It was a lot, and they fought everything. I mean, everything.
And it was nip and tuck.
torturous.
We weren't sure we were going to win.
Yeah,
And then they went to the appeals court.
yeah. So they took it as far as they could go.
The good news is Vallejo made law that there was never in the history of the United States a public employee bargaining agreement voided by a bankruptcy. And they argued they didn't have the right to do that, and we argued we did. The judge said we did. They took it to the appellate court. The appellate court agreed. So now it's law. You can thank Vallejo for that.
Yes. Everyone should perhaps contribute a little money to Vallejo.
The hat will be passed
The hat will
after the
be passed
meeting.
A subtext of your remarks is that we need better city council members and better local office holders. You've run for public office. I've run for public office. You know what a lonely business it can be. And you also know that when you're running, money is very important. You're not going to get anywhere without a war chest. And given that fact, and given the facts of political life, and that is that what you've given us as a solution is, well, taxpayers have to rise up. And it doesn't really work that way, because interest groups rise up in politics, as we all know, and there's interest groups behind every politician sitting there. The question in my mind is, okay, we want to curb the political power of public employee unions. Now, the governor of Wisconsin has made an attempt to do that by curbing collective bargaining, and they seem to be making some progress. Another way of going at it, I suppose, is to say there ought to be some legal limits on what public employees do, although I think that may run into First Amendment problems. My question to you is, was any of that discussed, number one, and and any ways of curbing public employee union influence of public on public office holders? For example, you're talking about the assemblyman and that senator who were opposing. Obviously, they were because they know what their interest groups are. But anyway, were any of these kind of reforms discussed? And I don't see the quote taxpayers rising up as a solution. There's got to be better candidates brought up through the process. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't. I think the only solution is for the taxpayers to create their own interest group, because what you said is exactly right. And take me for example. I'm most likely I'm not. No, I know I'll never be able to go to the Assembly or the Senate or above and into the federal level, because I will never take the kind of support and give the kind of requests back that are required at that level.
Good for you.
I won't do it. So
that's not good, because you do very well.
You're right. You're right. And
I'd love to have you
sad.
there with your experience.
That's why our system is so sick.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why our
People like
system is
you
so
can't
sick.
get there.
Right, and we just, how we do that, I think that's a collective solution we have to figure out.
Exactly.
Because, I didn't take any money. I took money from people. $5. I had a woman send me $5, $10, $100. Our elections in Vallejo are $25,000 about to get elected to city council. If you consider that, and you're raising it from people who just believe in you, you consider that the unions are collecting their dues every 2-year election cycle. They're raising $1 million in dues.
I understand, but that's exactly what the governor of Wisconsin went after. Was there any talk about doing that in Vallejo?
Yeah, I don't think, we talked about campaign finance reform, and I think, what was the law that came down that said basically you can't do it?
Yeah, you've got First Amendment issues.
Yeah, but there was some.
Was that a collective bargaining, I don't think.
Well,
you do, and I think.
Where are you going to go, Peter, for example? You're going to go to the legislature, Democratic and controlled legislature in Sacramento, and ask them, would you pass some laws against your people that are giving you all your money?
It's not going to happen there, obviously.
It's not going to happen.
And the thing is I believe I believe in unions. Private sector unions are different than public sector unions, and I think it was Roosevelt who agreed with that. That you have an inherent conflict of interest when you have employees putting money into campaigns to elect their bosses to make the decisions on their contracts.
Just as an aside, there is actually a proposition that is in process of collecting signatures that would curb that money. I'll talk to you afterwards. I'm involved in it.
I believe.
Any other questions?
I believe that is, the citizens have to rise up. Like you said, it doesn't happen, but we're in unusual times. It has to happen.
I think it can happen, but it has to be channeled into interest groups.
It does. You're right.
Let me say, I'm not going to say which elected official from the state told me this, but he said, Joe, if you fight the fire union, you're going to lose. You're going to lose your career, you're going to lose your job. Stop doing it.
You did. You lost your job.
Was it Democrat?
Yeah, he was a Democrat, actually.
And how he's not.
Yeah.
Does a federal judge have authority to break legacy costs? And
What, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
does a federal judge have the authority to break pension obligations, legacy costs of organizations?
Yes.
And question number 2 is, when you agreed to that police officer's union contract, did the federal judge have to bless it before it became effective?
He didn't have to bless it per se.
Did he have to approve it?
Nope.
I thought that was the idea of bankruptcy, that everything had to be.
Chapter 9 is different. It's different. He
There's
approves
a separation of powers clause in the Constitution that does not allow a federal bankruptcy court to get involved in the business of the city council. He can't.
He oversees the overall bankruptcy.
He can say,
proceedings.
shame on you, I don't like that, but he cannot dictate a vote of the city council. He can throw the contract out, but he cannot dictate how the city council votes.
So he had to bless that contract?
No, he did not.
No, he did not.
He didn't have the authority to throw it out?
No.
Yeah,
Because it was done after bankruptcy.
Yeah.
It was
Existing
post-bankruptcy.
contracts he could.
Anything before the city council voted on May 6th and it was filed on May 22nd, the judge could throw any contract out.
Is there a trustee in Chapter 9 of bankruptcy?
Not like in when you would go through a Chapter 9. No, everything goes through the judge. And there is a trustee, but the trustee is more of a, I wouldn't say an umpire, but more of a coordinator. It's not a powerful
different
position like it
process.
is in Chapter 9.
And it shows why
Excuse me, you're like Chapter 13.
why it's not the solution unless you're forced to it. I mean, it's tough to make the right things happen.
It's really interesting. The bankruptcy laws of the United States, the book is about that thick. I mean, I don't think it's 80 pages long. It's very short. But of course, there's all kinds of case law that make it a career work. But
And the legacy cost is interesting. I think that's something. Again, people retire at a certain place, expecting to, they make their plan, and going after that it's really a tough thing to do. I think for myself, looking at this, I would like to be able to take employees who are currently working and change what they have going forward. Not just for new hires, but existing employees too. But everything from that moment going forward, that's what you change. But what they've earned already, they've earned already.
I have a question on that contract. I mean, that contract, wouldn't you be essentially increasing your indebtedness? I mean, under other bankruptcy plans, you're not allowed to increase your indebtedness until the plan is satisfied. So by offering those raises, I mean, that's why I just understand why it would be allowed, even though maybe at that juncture you were able to enter into a new contract.
It's that separation clause of the Constitution, but really, ultimately, it's the final end product of bankruptcy. It's not the individual decisions made during bankruptcy. It's, do we have a workout plan in the end that is sustainable and isn't in deficit, so the judge will say, yes, you're out of bankruptcy. How we got there isn't the individual decisions he doesn't care about. He cares about the end product.
One of the important...
The other creditors can use that against you, because essentially you're treated as a priority creditor. I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I would think that they could take action against it, say, I want the same treatment. They can't. I just think it's bizarre.
It was bizarre. I agree. It was terrible.
Why doesn't you need all lobbying and that?
I think Stephanie mentioned during her talk about the pendency plan. That's actually a very important aspect of a municipal bankruptcy. It's one of the very, very few occasions in law where the city council doesn't control. The CEO of the organization or the city manager signs the pendency plan and puts it into effect, and then gives a courtesy copy to the city council and says, this is your pendency plan. That takes the council out of the political football arena, if you will, of fighting with the unions. And so when I signed that pendency plan, I violated every single union contract we had with the city. And so the city council could sit back and say, I didn't do it. And so that's kind of an important distinction in Chapter 9 bankruptcy for a municipality that you don't normally see.
I think we're almost done.
Yeah, last question. Is the retirement age for public employee union members, is that a negotiable item? I would assume it is.
Like 3% at 50 or 7
Yeah,
or
yeah.
60, 55.
I'm just thinking, it needs to be elevated.
If you're a member of CalPERS, it's set by law, and the minimum age is 50, and you can all the way up. And then each municipality in California has a contract with CalPERS, and that sets whether it's 3 at 50, 2 at 60, or whatever the formula is.
So you can affect it. You can make those changes.
You can.
Like we did a second tier with fire. You can do that. Again, it takes a lot of political will to do it.
Yeah, do you, either of you have any final thoughts? Something that didn't get asked that you'd like to share with us, or no?
I don't think so. I hope I was able to give you a good look at this, and I know it's perhaps not quite satisfying because it isn't to me either. But ultimately, in the end, Vallejo is going to be better. We will. We're healthier than we were before, and our problems are out there in the open. So you've got to have good folks up there that keep fighting it.
I have one final thought. I want to thank Stephanie for her courage standing
Yeah.
up against these employee unions, because it was not easy, it was tough. But she had the courage, along with another council member, to stand up against those unions. And for that, I will always be grateful. Thank you.